It's Mykel.
Yep.
Williams. Edge rusher, Georgia. 49er. All right, we're coming to you live from the Laughing Monk Studios. Laughing Monk, righteously brewed here in San Francisco. We're also going out to the River Islands guest line so that we can check in with someone who's not been on the show in far too long, and it's actually only been like 2 or 3 months. But we miss you, Greg Cosell. It's great to have you.
Hey, guys. How are you?
We're great. Let's jump right into it. What do you think of the Niners' pick of Mykel Williams?
I mean, I think it's a good pick at a position of need. Williams is an interesting guy. I watched him last summer. I think I watched 6 or 7 games last summer from his 2023 tape. Then, of course, I watched him this year quite a few games. He was a guy that, he came out of Georgia. He was a 5-star recruit, a top 50 prospect. I actually had a chance to see him up close and personal. He was the Maxwell Award winner when the Maxwell dinner was in Philadelphia. And so I saw him, in a suit, and he looked like a man when he was 17 years old. But he's an interesting guy because some would argue that he hasn't quite reached his full potential. Because he's big, he's over 6'5", he's 260, he's got ridiculously long arms. As a pass rusher, I think it's all there in his body, guys. And we'll talk about this as we go through this first half hour, but it hasn't quite come together yet, but there's no question that it's all there. And, obviously the 49ers have a very good D-line coach, so the goal is to get it there because it's certainly, when you see what he can do and what he does at times, you feel like if he could just get to that point more often that he could be a dominant player.
How is he as a scheme fit, Greg? Because we know with, the defensive coordinator coming back, and it's, Robert Saleh, and they like to run that wide 9 with the 4-3. Yep. Does his skill set match with what they most likely are going to try to do with that wide 9 and the 4-3?
Sure. I mean, he best projects and transitions to the NFL as a 4-3 DN. There's no question. You can move him inside and sub fronts if you like, but as a base player, when they line up on the first day of rookie OTA or mini camp or whatever they call it these days, he's going to be a 4-3 D end. So I think, what you're looking for, obviously, is the ability to rush the quarterback. That's first and foremost. We know coaches will always talk about playing the run, setting the edge, all those fundamental things that are important. But at the end of the day, when you draft a defensive end with the 11th pick in the draft and a 4-3 front, you're counting on him to be able to rush the quarterback. He's shown flashes of that. He's shown flashes of speed to power conversion. He's very strong. He's got really long arms. He's got that short stroke strength where he can jar people. And the power part is the most critical piece to have as you enter the NFL. And he has that. So he's also shown the ability to play off contact. What he needs to get better at is he needs to get better at using his hands, to have a more tools in his toolbox, as it were. He needs a larger arsenal of moves in order to rush the quarterback consistently at the NFL level. I think he's able to do that. I think it's there, but when I finished watching his tape, guys, obviously I didn't know he was going to be drafted by the 49ers. I basically said that it's all there, but it's an open question as to whether he'll do it in the NFL. If you don't see it on tape, you don't know. But there's no question that just as a physical athlete, it is all there.
Greg Cosell, NFL Films, with us here, 3 o'clock hour on Willard and Dibbs as we break down both what happened yesterday and what's coming later on this evening on day 2 of the NFL draft. Greg, can you maybe share with us and the audience a little bit about the why in terms of his college experience and why you think it hasn't fully all clicked, even though, as you say, the tools are there?
Well, there's probably a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm sure he was just a ridiculous athlete from the time he was young. And he probably, as I said, I saw him when he was 17 years old, and he looked like a man. So I'm sure he didn't need a lot of moves and a lot of ancillary things in order to be a dominant high school player. Number two, he's been through some injuries in his college career. And, you never know the extent of those injuries and how they impact a player. The bottom line is, and this is the case case in the NFL. If you're playing, and you guys know this, if you're playing, the injuries don't matter. No, there's not one player who walks into a locker room after a game and says, guys, sorry, I didn't play great today, but my ankle hurts. That doesn't fly. So it doesn't matter. So the point is, if you're playing, you're playing. So, but, from what I've heard, he dealt with some injuries this past season. So maybe that's the reason. But, like I said, it's there. It's a matter of getting it out of him.
And when you look at the other players of his caliber and his ilk who got taken in the first round, and you look at his tape, is he comparable with the other players who were either drafted right behind him or all around him?
Well, who are you referring to specifically? Anybody? I mean like Shamar
in
Stewart?
particular, yeah. And, you talk about Nolan, who was taken a few picks later, a guy who, is in the interior and maybe could be equally a fit for this Niner team that's desperate for both.
Well, Nolan's obviously a D tackle. I thought he was D tackle number 1 in this draft. I like him better as a player than Mykel Williams. But, they might feel they wanted an edge player. See, that's the thing. First of all, I don't know what teams' boards are. I have such great respect for the people in this business because I know what I do. I'm not one of those people that's going to say, oh, that's a reach, that's a bad pick. I won't talk like that just because I have too much respect. I can only tell you what I think, which doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. I really loved Walter Nolan's tape. I thought he was a top 10 type player in this given draft. But Williams is a guy. Look, we could be talking in 3 years about Williams being a dominant player in the league. He has that kind of ability. Or we could be talking about him being just, a good player. Or we could be talking about him being an average player. You never know. But he certainly has everything you want when you just look at pure physical and athletic traits.
Greg, what would you say about his teammate, the linebacker, Jaylen Walker? Because a lot of people, when they got to the 11th pick, and Walker was available too. And again, no Dre Greenlaw, position of need in theory. I'd love to know what your thought was in that moment as far as, that player and the fit with the Niners.
Yeah, when I finished Jaylen Walker, I wasn't sure what he was in the NFL. I think the best thing he does is rush the quarterback, but he's not a 4-3 D end. So, he's 6'1", 243. He's not a 4-3 D end. And I thought that was the best thing he did was to rush the quarterback. I did not think he was a great stacked backer. So when I finished watching him, I said to myself, because the way I watch this guy's, as you probably can figure out, is I'm not just looking at the college tape and seeing, oh boy, he's a really good player. I'm thinking about what he is in the NFL, because that's the whole point of the exercise, is to project and transition these guys into the NFL. Now, I obviously don't work for a team, but we're talking specifically about the Niners right now, and they are a 4-3 defense. And in a 4-3 defense, Jaylen Walker, to me, is not a 4-3 defensive end. Now, you can use him as a sub-front pass rusher, as a DN, but if you're going to line up in your base defense, he is not a D end. So he becomes a stacked backer, and I'm not sure that that's his best position. So I wasn't sure about Jaylen Walker, even though the guy clearly is sudden and twitchy and explosive and certainly can rush the quarterback. I'm not sure that the Niners would see him as an exact fit for their defense. Yeah,
it's an interesting way to look at it. And I think about what you said about Mykel Williams and, maybe coming to the inside on like passing downs. Is he somebody that you would think about playing D tackle in a 4-3 on passing downs as opposed to run downs? Can he be a guy who holds up on the interior against the run?
Well, no, I would see him as a D end in your base defense. Like I said, maybe, when it's 3rd and long, if you want to bring him inside, if you feel like you have another really good edge pass rusher. I mean, they still have Gross Matos. They still have the other kid whose name I can't remember, the long name. I can't remember his name right now.
Okwonu, yeah.
Okwonu, who had really good snaps a year ago, and he played on the outside as well. So I think in a sub front, you can move Williams inside. But if you're lining up in your base 4-3 on 1st and 10 or 2nd and 4, your base defense, Williams is a defensive end.
I don't know if this question is gonna fit because there's so many stylistic kind of things here, Greg. But and by the way, want to let all of our listeners know that we are about to be open for your business with Greg Cosell. So if it's a draft question, where the 49ers sit, their needs, the players who are still on the board, what happened yesterday. If you've got a question for the great Greg Cosell at NFL Films, go ahead and dial up right now. We will take your calls this hour, 888-957-9570. But you said something in one of your first answers, Greg, about like the question is whether Mykel will be able to do XYZ at the NFL level. How many guys approximately in this draft do you feel like, no doubt, that guy's going to be able to do it at the NFL level?
Boy, that's a high. I mean, I can't think of all 32 picks right now off the top of my head.
Right.
But
I mean, before the picks are even made, Greg. Like going into last night, did you feel there were a certain handful of no doubters?
Well, I think I always feel that way in my mind when I watch guys, but I always think in terms of scheme and fit, because you have to understand, scouts, they obviously work for a team, but they think very much in terms of measurables and traits. Coaches think in terms of scheme adaptability. How does a guy fit my scheme? Because that's what he's going to line up with. Now, obviously, if you have a transcendent player, but there's very few of those, you might adapt the scheme a little bit because you want to make sure that you maximize that particular player's abilities. But you know, when I watch guys, think of it this way, guys, on defense, every single week on defense, depending on the team, 17, 18, 19 guys play because there's different packages, right? Isn't that normally the case? So maybe one team has 15, but a lot of guys play on defense. So when I watch guys, and I had to learn this lesson years ago, when I started watching college players, and that probably goes back, 15, 18 years, I used to think in terms of, well, he either can play or he can't play, and I was wrong. I was wrong for a number of years because so many guys play. You know, there's a lot of guys I watch, and I say to myself, this guy could be really good as a dime safety, okay? But you know what? The 15 snaps that guy plays, those 15 snaps are really important to the defensive coordinator. So there's a lot of guys I watch that I think can play in the league and make a contribution. If you're asking me who do I think is going to be, a superstar, that's always a hard question to answer. Like for instance, we mentioned Walter Nolan. I really liked Walter Nolan. I thought he was D-tackle 1. When I watched his tape, there were shades of what Jalen Carter did at Georgia. I just loved his tape. He was ragdolling, interior offensive linemen in the SEC. So I liked his tape more than Mason Graham, and Mason Graham went 5th to, I guess, the Browns because they made that trade.
Right.
Does that mean I'm right? I guess we're going to find out. But that's what I thought when I watched the tape.
Yeah, interesting on scheme and fit and situation and the rest. And I want to pivot just to the quarterback part of it because Cam Ward goes 1 to Tennessee and Shadour Sanders is still sitting out there. And yet Jackson Dart got taken later in the first round. What did you think about the way the quarterback first round played out with Shadour Sanders still sitting on the couch?
Yeah, to me, it's about right. It's funny. I had a number of conversations today with people calling me, and I thought Shadour Sanders. Think of it this way: it's kind of a 30,000-foot macro response here. In today's NFL, and again, now you get down to team and scheme and coaches and all those things all factor in. Okay, in today's NFL. More often than not, you really need a quarterback that has some kind of second reaction outside of structure ability. Defenses are sophisticated with pressure concepts. It's really difficult on third down. So your quarterback has to be able to make plays outside the structure of the play call at some point in a game. Okay, now not everybody's Josh Allen. We know that. Or Patrick Mahomes. But at some point, you've got to be able to do that. If you're a pure pocket quarterback, which essentially Shadour Sanders is. Okay, now he's not immobile, but he's at his core, he's a pocket quarterback. Just like at his core, C.J. Stroud's a pocket quarterback. Then you have to be really, really good in so many areas, okay? And Shadour Sanders is good in some and has meaningful concerns in others. So to me, he was not a first-round pick. Now, he may end up being a really good player. It depends on team and scheme and how he's coached. And if he's willing to be coached, very often it comes down to that. So the fact that he was not taken in the first round did not surprise me at all.
Do you think he's going off the board early tonight or should?
Is he worthy of a second-round pick? Probably, given the nature of the position. But I would say in an ideal world, he's probably a mid to late second-round type pick player when you look at it, for what his traits are and what the league is. He's not as good a prospect as C.J. Stroud. And C.J. Stroud, like I said, they're similar stylistically, but Stroud was a far better prospect. And I think the reason Jackson Dart probably goes higher, and he has some concerns of his own as well, is that he gives you that mobility. Jackson Dart can make plays with his legs. Sanders, can he run for a first down? Sure, but he's not really a playmaker with his legs. Dart can make plays with his legs.
Greg, what did you think of Ashton Ginty to the Raiders at 6?
It's funny, guys. That's another thing that now is kind of a larger worldview, because last year there were 6 running backs in the NFL that had 300 carries. That was the first time in a very long time that you had that number of running backs with that number of carries. So maybe it's just a snapshot. Maybe it's a trend in the league. We don't know the answer to that yet. But I think teams are realizing that the run game is becoming a bigger factor, the way defenses have evolved over the last couple of years to take away certain things in the pass game. And I think the run game is becoming a bigger factor. So, and the Raiders obviously signed Geno Smith, and now they have a running back who will clearly be their foundation back. He's clearly a very good prospect. I mean, I've been on record as saying I don't think he's as good a prospect as Bijan Robinson was when he came out of Texas, but he's clearly a very good prospect.
And ultimately, the prospect is only as good as the O-line that can create holes for him. So that is one that's interesting to see. One more before we go to the phones, Greg, because many people are lining up to ask you questions. But the idea that Jacksonville trades up to 2 to take Travis Hunter, and Hunter wants to play on both sides of the football, is that something that's really sustainable in this National Football League today?
Well, here's something that I'm not hearing a lot of people talk about, and to me it's obvious, and I'm not saying this because I think, oh boy, I'm smarter than anybody else.
But you are.
But no one,
yeah.
Well, no, I'm not. Well, just ask my wife. She won't tell you that.
You're smarter than somebody, Greg. Maybe
right.
not everybody. But
I'm smarter than my two.
But yeah,
I'm smarter than my 2 cats. But But anyway, thank you. But anyway, the point is, to me, is this. The point is preparation. I mean, could you imagine? Think of it this way. Now, think if it's the Niners. Think if Kyle Shanahan has him and he wants to play him at receiver, and he goes into Robert Saleh on a Wednesday morning and says, "Hey, coach, the next 2 days, Travis Hunter's going to be with me on offense, so he's not going to be with you on defense." And Robert Saleh says, "But coach, I'm putting in 15 new things this week for the opponent we're playing. And you know what? If he can't be in our meetings and practice on the defensive end, I don't feel comfortable putting him out there." See, to me, it comes all down to preparation. Is he physically capable of doing that? Maybe. I mean, I don't think it's realistic to expect him to play 120 snaps for 17 games, but maybe I'm wrong. But to me, it's the preparation part. You know how coaches are, what sticklers they are for preparation. They want guys out there that they can trust, that don't make mistakes. And I'm not suggesting Travis Hunter, he's supposed to be incredibly intelligent. So it's no knock on Travis Hunter, but it's just if you're not in the room, you don't know what's being done. If you're not in class, you're probably not going to pass the test. It's just the way it works. So that to me is the issue. It's the preparation part of it. And I really haven't heard anybody talk about that. And to me, that's the obvious part.
Greg Cosell, NFL Films, with us here for the whole 3 o'clock hour as we get ready for rounds 2 and 3 tonight. Greg, we got some listeners that like to throw a question or two at you. Let's go to Cole in the city. Cole, thank you for calling. You're on with Greg Cosell.
Hey, thanks for taking my call, guys.
Yeah, man. Go ahead.
So I'm curious, Greg, if you can talk a little bit about what happened with Mike Green out of Marshall. Like, he was the Sun Belt Player of the Year. He led the country in sacks. Baldy was saying that the Niners, he wouldn't be surprised if they took him at 11. And I don't know why he fell out of the first round. Like, can you shed some light on that?
All I can tell you is what I've heard, and because I don't talk about this because I don't know, but I've heard that there were some issues with him on a personal level. So I don't want to go there because I don't know. I just heard that. But I will say this, as a player, he's a more advanced pass rusher at this moment in time than Williams. I thought Mike Green had more tools in his toolbox. I thought that he had a diversified pass rush repertoire. I thought he had a really good feel for attacking offensive tackles. So I thought there were two guys who were not drafted last night. To me, I'm just telling you what I think based on my tape study. There were two guys that I thought had the most tools in the toolbox of the pass rushers. One was Green, and the other was Nick Scourton from Texas A&M, who did not go either in the first round. Scourton, there's no problem with him personally from what I've heard, but he's not a twitchy guy, so people maybe think that, oh, you can't take a guy who's not a twitchy guy in the first round. But yeah, Green is, I really liked his tape. Obviously, he played in a lesser conference, but he did play against Ohio State, and I watched that tape, and he held his own, actually had a great sack against their right tackle with a great spin move. So just from a pure athletic standpoint, and I really like Mike Green, and I thought he was worthy of a first-round pick, but I don't want people to think I'm knocking the 49ers. There's many variables and many factors that go into this. I'm just sitting in my office at NFL Films watching tape.
Oh, Gary in Daly City next up. Hi, Gary. Thanks for calling. You're on with Greg Cosell.
Yeah, thanks. Been a fan since the 60s. Question, best wide receiver that would fit Shanahan's system that's left on the board, and best big play linebacker, or just all-around linebacker that would fit Salah's system right now.
Thanks, Gary.
I'll give you a wide receiver that I love that I think would absolutely fit the system, and that's Jayden Higgins from Iowa State. He's 6'4" and an eighth. He runs well. He caught a ton of balls between the numbers at Iowa State. That was his game, but he's got some juice to him. I love Jayden Higgins. To me, I watched him last summer, didn't know one thing about him. I think he was a transfer from Eastern Kentucky, and I actually love it when I don't know anything about a player, when he's totally virgin territory for me, and then I watch him and I really like him, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know anything about this guy. So Jayden Higgins, to me, that was the first name that came to my mind. Linebacker, I'll tell you a guy I really like, and linebackers now, stacked backers kind of fall into two categories in this league. The guys who are athletic and can run and are kind of run and chase players, which the colleges are giving to the NFL more than ever before. And then the old school linebackers who kind of can stack and shed, as we say, are physical. And I really like Demetrius Knight from South Carolina. I have no idea where he'll be drafted. He can run, by the way, but he's at his core, he's a big physical stack and shed linebacker, and he's just a player I really liked on tape.
Greg Cosell, NFL Films, breaking down the NFL draft, and we are not done yet. So number one, we're still taking your calls for the rest of the 3 o'clock hour for Greg. So if you've got an NFL draft or 49ers related question for Greg, fire away right now, 888-957-9570. Coming up next, more with Greg, and we will get into specific thoughts as the Niners are only 11 picks away from doing this again. Round 2 starts in a half hour. Maybe are there some other names, Greg, that you like? And let's look at the current roster and maybe some of the needs they still have.